Hello, everyone. Bonjour. I'll speak in English. My background I'm an anthropologist by training, and then I decided to run for cities, to run for local elections in the city of Athens, and I got elected, and then I became the chief resilience officer in Athens, and then the deputy mayor or urban resilience, urban adaptation, and urban nature, and then there was this crazy heat thing going on, and I kind of realized that cities are not really prepared for heat and are not preparing for heat. Like a lot of cities are preparing for flooding and for sea level rise and for other issues, but heat is not an issue that cities were preparing for, which was strange because we've been talking about global warming for a very long time, but nobody has really been taking seriously the issue that we are really warming up. So I decided to focus on heat, and then I was one of the first chief heat officers in there's 7 cities around the world now that have this kind of, it's all women, one woman that kind of deals with heat and cross-sectorally in cities. And then we decided with this Ars Rock Resilience Center that I work with that we need to put somebody in the UN to start creating a global governance on heat and try to create this possibility, which is a terribly difficult thing because the UN is a total mess and fragmented and all that, but we're trying, we'll see. So, okay, extreme heat and urban resilience. 7 last years have been the hottest ever. We know that 2023 has been the hottest we've ever had since we started counting with measuring global temperatures around 1850. And it broke all kinds of records. And here you can see from the pre-industrial times up to how much out of the normal was 2023. Actually, depending on who measured it, we reached 1.4 to almost 1.5 degrees, which I remind you that's what we are trying to keep ourselves below by 2050, or below 2. And actually on the 17th of November, which is my birthday, it actually got above 2 degrees Celsius. The average temperature of our globe for the 17th and 18th of November got above 2 degrees Celsius. And we know from the ice cores and from trees, from the trees that ever since we've had communities of humans living on Earth, these types of temperatures, like 2 and above, have not been temperatures that communities of people have been living in. So the hottest day, the hottest month, the hottest surface of the sea that we've ever measured, etc., etc. And the problem, and also like we had this crazy, like this photo of these heat domes that were in the whole of the northern hemisphere. We had simultaneous heat waves going on, across. And the problem, however, is that we now have the 10th consecutive months of extreme heat, which are breaking records. And this is a problem because now scientists believe that that scientists are saying that we are outside of the different types of models that they have been building, because they were hoping that in the winter, of course, the weather would get a little bit better, but we still keep breaking records. So we're a little bit freaked out about this and what's going to happen. And who knows, maybe we'll turn out okay in the spring and in the summer, but, we're all a little bit worried about that. So as you all know, cities are hotter in general than are almost twice as hot as the global average. In cities, we have materials, they're very mineralized, so they actually absorb heat and they radiate it at night. So that's particularly dangerous for the health of the people. And in cities, at least in Europe, we can talk about the urban heat island because we have usually a lot more green outside of the city. But in other cities, we don't use so much the urban heat island because in different parts of the world, if you have, for example, sand or other types of surfaces around the city, you could have the opposite, the reverse effect. So the actual built. So I'm just saying that because I learned it recently, that it's really, we often use urban heat islands a lot to talk about the effect of heat in cities, but it's not necessarily, it talks about a differential. And I'm trying to talk about urban heat these days more than urban heat island. But we know that because we produce a lot of heat from cars and from air conditionings and from the materials that we've built our cities are not good for heat, really not good. They're kind of death traps for our people. And of course, the title of my thing is that no city is an island, because of course there's a constant connection of the city with the peri-urban areas, and we often tend to forget that the links and the dependencies with wild. So heat is like the main thing, right? We are heating up, but of course heat creates droughts, and heat creates. And the drought and the heat creates fuel incredible fires, which we're now dealing with. And of course, also heat creates a lot of humidity that goes up into the atmosphere. And then we have these incredible cloudbursts. So heat is also, of course, linked to flooding. And so all of these things are really kind of connecting the cities even more with the surrounding areas, because the effects of one thing really spill into our cities. And I'm just here reminding everyone of the fact that fires can create unbearably bad conditions in cities from pollution and from microparticles that come with the burning. And in New York, this was because of a fire in Canada, which made New York really difficult to breathe in New York, and people had to use masks for about a week from forests burning in Canada. So 2022 has been like a really important kind of moment, because we actually had a research that showed that we lost, at first they thought it was between 15 to 20,000 people in Europe, and then eventually they realized, with especially figuring out how to count deaths from heat, because that's not an easy feat. We don't have data easily from deaths that are related to heat, but in 2023 a research came out that talked about more than 61,000 deaths attributed to heat. And at the same summer, we had incredible drought conditions, and the drought conditions affected energy systems and power plants because the rivers were too low, and then agriculture was affected, and then of course food issues, and it was at the same time with the Ukraine war. So we had like all these insecurities. I'm just reminding you all this because I know we all lived through it and we all remember it. I'm just trying to say how this is. Like the motherboard is heat, and we keep forgetting it. And the other important thing that I wanted to say, there's this really, really important research that came out from the European Environmental Agency that came out just about 10 or 15 days ago, that talks about how our systems are affected from climate. And I think it's a really interesting how the climate basically affects these systems, which are the ecosystem, water, infrastructure, health, economy, and finance, and food. But the way that they're interconnected is kind of interesting, because water becomes the crucial kind of element, right? It's like it's the key that actually exacerbates the vicious cycles that we can fall into, because it affects all these different, all of them in very different ways. And it's actually worth, basically the point of this whole report is that we really have to think more systemically. The way our governments are organized and our structures are organized, and the way we look at things, because it's more efficient and more effective, it's much more siloed. And we really have to start realizing how much more we have to think on all of the interconnections and interrelations and be much more clever with these types of things. And we're not set up for that. So we have to change in this kind of way of understanding things more in systemic ways. And it's a great report. I urge you to take a look. It's the European Climate Risk Assessment. And it kind of has these different systems. It talks about systems and what are, so in purple, it's like what are the first things, the urgent things that we have to take care of. And then kind of it goes down the different colors of the different things that we have to not be so kind of, we don't really have to act on it now. Oh, we don't really have to act on it now. Okay, maybe I should use that. If you look at health, heat stress is the first thing, right? So this is something that I'm surprised that so few people and so few leaders and decision makers and policymakers realize that heat is the number one killer of our people. And it often, because it doesn't destroy, big infrastructure stuff, and it kind of has this, it's kind of a silent thing that goes into cities and find who are the weak people and kills like our weakest people in our society. And it's kind of, it's shocking to see that it really has this way of identifying who have we left behind. Who are, our old people, our sick people, our young people, like who are we really, who do we need to support? Because they are the ones that actually are the victims of extreme heat. And here we have a little map of globally the population over 65, how many more we're losing through the years because of extreme heat. And then if we go back to the health system, again, we have to keep kind of looking into the systems, right? So the WHO, the way that it approaches extreme heat health impacts is it talks about direct impacts, which is what happens to the body. And then it kind of looks at, okay, what do we have to think about? We have to make more robust the whole health kind of services. We have to look into accidents and work-related accidents. We have to look into vector-borne diseases, and we also have to figure out how our health system is impacted by problems that could happen in power, in water, in transport, and in productivity, which also falls, which is a very big issue. So another way of looking at it is that first you have to make your system more robust so that it responds to the crisis. But then there's these other things, which is like the emergency response agencies or the infrastructure systems that also have to be there when you have the crisis going on. So let's look quickly at adaptation finance, because this is all about adaptation. So I have to get you, it's really important to think about, CO2 emissions, and this is like the real problem, like the real cause. But we have screwed up things so much that we really have to think seriously about adaptation, and we're not. And so I'm very glad that you guys are doing this, because this is like, we need to do innovation, we need to think finance, and we need to figure out how to step it up because we're lagging behind. So recently we had a real jump in the finance that went to climate, and however it's almost 1.2 trillion. We need about 8 trillion or more for climate. We're still very low in our but this is the most interesting thing, right? In mitigation, we have all this funding going from the private sector and the public sector. And for adaptation, we have almost exclusively the public sector. Very, very tiny amount is the private sector, and also a very, very small amount in relation to the funding that goes to mitigation. And of course, it makes sense because with mitigation, it's an easy business model. We have return of investment, right? So return of investment, you make a business case easily. But in relation to adaptation, we have uncertainty and complexity. For example, what are our targets? Are we going with what kind of scenario for CO2 emissions are we going to? Are we going with a high level like an 8 or a 6.2 or a 4.5, or like which scenario are we going to, and are we going for 2030? Are we going for 2050? Like what is our organization or our city or, whoever it is? What are our targets? It becomes complex, and it's not clear. The scale, often the problems with adaptation are somewhere else where the problem is happening. So we have to figure out what the right scale is, and often you have to go to a different municipality or a different region to solve the problem that's happening in another one. And how do you solve financing in those cases, or governance? Local specificity, things are very specific when you're dealing with adaptation. Solutions that work in one place don't work at another one. So it's really difficult to scale things up and to move things around. Governance and policy coherence. Governance is a very big issue, and Pierre touched upon it. The whole issue of that we need much more cross-sectoral governance, and we need the capacity for different people to understand how to approach things in systems, in a more systemic approach. This is very difficult in governance, and again, adaptation solutions bring different sectors into the discussion so that also we don't have maladaptation. Because, if you don't bring a lot of different sectors in to discuss something and you have it like really siloed, you can create real problems in another sector. So governance is a problem. We're not used to work in that way. Capacity gaps. We need to build capacity in the public sector as well as in the private sector. Like we need to keep educating people, and I suppose this place where we're at is an important example of how we need to do this kind of thing. Like we really need universities to be closer to cities, universities to be closer to private sector, and to keep educating us, because we need fast to change the way we do things, materials, design solutions, etc., etc. Temporal challenges. You do something for when, like what is, for example, we vote people into power for 4 years, and often the projects that they start, they end up kind of materializing after their term. So we have a lot of problems with decision makers to actually decide to do the right kind of adaptation or resilience, big infrastructure project, because they're not even going to see it. It might actually be finished. So temporal issues, this is just one example. Or, we had, temporal issues, and then equity is a very big, issue. We have to figure out how not to exacerbate inequities when we do adaptation projects, and finally environmental trade-offs, which are a very much, we have to figure out how we don't actually influence negatively different types of environmental systems that we're building in. However, we are more and more kind of figuring out what the solutions are, and how we can, it kind of becomes very clear, for example, more and more from different research, that shade makes an incredible difference in the sensation of thermal comfort for people that walk around in the outdoors, right? So air temperature or surface temperatures and all that we used to be more focused on are only part of like really, it seems that the most important thing has to do with shading and how our body feels under shade and not on direct radiation. And we also know from a very recent research that took place in 94, I think, cities around Europe, that if we manage to have 30% or above canopy in a city, we can lower deaths related to heat by 1/3. So these are now things that we can actually measure, and we can give I'm going to very quickly talk about Athens. Athens is very densely built and very kind of dense, has really densely populated areas. We have about 19% of the people living in Athens are above 60 years old, which is the average, is the same average as Europe in general. So we have about 19% of our people in Europe above 60 years old, which is an issue which we have to look into, again, because we have to look at their vulnerability apart from other issues. But also Athens was very quickly cementified. Now we have more than 80% of the surfaces. Everything is covered. And we have greens that are very unevenly distributed. And we created a vulnerability and exposure map with low-income households and seniors and a lot of different things, and heat, and to try to figure out where to. I know Paris has done similar things. And then in 2021, we had this crazy heat wave, which killed 2,300 people within 2.5 weeks. And we wouldn't have even found out about that because nobody in Greece talked about it. I found that out because Politico.eu created did an article and checked out the deaths and compared them for the last 5 years, what were the excess deaths in the same dates, et cetera, and figured out for Italy, France, and Greece what were the excess deaths. So that's the other thing, that we don't really have data for heats, but we decided to create a plan we installed a chief heat officer and did a plan for heat, and the way that, I've always been thinking about it is to have these 3 big categories. One is awareness raising. Still people don't understand how dangerous it is. And we created a categorization system for heat waves. Then preparedness, which is all the different ways that you can make sure that you support the most vulnerable during heat waves, which are the short-term things. And then redesign, which is the big one, right? So you have to figure out, mostly we focused on nature-based solutions and trying to make Athens more green. Very hard. Very densely built cities are really hard to green, but nature, green, and water is like our best ways of cooling the city down. It's retrofitting buildings is harder, but that's something that we have to look into. I wanted to give you some tools about heat. This is you can download this if you want, or look it up. It's a heat action platform. It was created by a whole group called the Cool Coalition. It's a book, but it's also a platform, and it has a lot of examples from all around the world, and it has a whole way of approaching planning for heat. And we also created a cooling district. This is an aqueduct that is in Athens that runs for 24 kilometers underground, that was built during Roman times, and it still carries tons of water, which now goes into the sewage. So there's a whole plan to start using the water for irrigation. And we also created these guidelines which use water elements, green elements, and different materials for these 3 typologies: roads and squares and parks, so that we actually create the public space becomes a cooling mechanism for the city. And I also wanted to say that another great series of guidelines for heat was created in Singapore. So that's another thing worth kind of looking up. And it has really interesting approaches to different aspects that can be redesigned to make a city cooler, including shading and materials and surfaces and transport and energy. It's a really, really interesting. Oh, and I was thinking, I thought of kind of mentioning that, for example, Singapore, 80% of its water is dependent on Malaysia. And this is, again, like one of these things, like you have to figure out, like even though Singapore is doing such a great job with really redesigning the city, it still has a lot of trouble with water. And by today, from different ways of dealing with water in clever ways, we've managed to almost bring it down to 45 to 50% of its water it produces itself, or it creates from desalination, or et cetera, but it still has a great dependency on Malaysia, and there's tensions there. So just kind of saying how do we, you guys deal with this, I suppose, all the time with these types of issues. And finally, I want to kind of talk about this, which was in Guangzhou, another set of things that you can find online that was worked together with the World Bank, and they get more into buildings per se and how you can use traditional architecture together with kind of more modern technologies to deal with heat, which I thought might be an interesting reference for you guys to take a look at. And then quickly, I want to go through some solutions for heat that cities have already established. And I'm not going to talk about Paris because Paris has been doing really a lot of stuff for heat, but I'm going to bring other examples from another one. Medellin did 36 corridors, which on average lowered temperatures by 2 degrees in the whole city, but topically, it can reach 4 degrees Celsius. Chicago has done like a lot of permeable pavements and green infrastructure. India was one of the first countries to establish a policy that makes white roofs obligatory, and they have been really kind of working with a lot of different innovative materials for cool roofs, cool pavements. Probably the biggest effort about cool pavements is now in Phoenix, Arizona, that has really enormous amounts of its pavements covered with a cool seal. Amsterdam has done this really great, interesting rooftop green roof with which it also keeps water so that it keeps irrigating the plants highly. And they figured out by comparison that when plants get really well irrigated, of course, they lower temperatures much better. So they do this blue-green roofs now, and on social housing. So it's pretty big, the space that they're covering, and they're also trying green roofs together with solar panels, which helps both the green roof and the solar panels. In Korea, this is one of the best examples because the river that was daylighted by getting rid of a 10-lane highway was actually has been measured to bring temperatures almost up to 6 degrees Celsius, lowering temperature up to 6 degrees in the neighborhood, in the vicinity of this. But also this is a great example of when different government levels align, because this was a project where the city and the central government were in alignment, and it was possible to create it. Very important. Again, this is something we don't talk enough. Like, we need to streamline climate efforts in different levels of government. And Melbourne has done an amazing job with its planning for biodiversity and urban forests. And Sierra Leone has been doing a lot for shading, and one of the best tree efforts that we've seen around the world. It has already in three years managed to plant 1 million trees, but the way that they're doing it is really, really great because it's very much community based. So people are actually helping with maintaining and caring for the trees, which is super important. I thought I would end if do I have 1 minute or should I stop? Okay. So I wanted to say that I was in a jury in 2022 for the European Public Space Awards. That's in Barcelona. And we were 6 jury members, and we had to grade 327 or 17, I don't remember, already established public spaces in Europe. Enormous amount of public spaces and from all around Europe, and we were in Barcelona for 2 days to get to figure out the 5 finalists. And the first day we fought about what is urban and what is public space for hours. So it was a total mess. We were on each other's throats. It was extremely heated, the whole argument, as if it was the future of Europe was depending on our decisions, which was it was very silly, but we all got really into it. And we did, the finalists was a swimming pool in Brussels, which was, I won't get into the specifics, you can look it up, a special kind of planting, getting rid of in Toulouse, getting rid of a parking lot, in The Hague, in Lund, a space that was separated from another very, very big development to allow it to develop slower, like instead of quickly develop, like slow development, and to get the people involved. A typology of a square in Riga, which was very interesting because the people kind of took over and created public gardens around this abandoned lot, but left the center of the lot wild nature. So it was like, we thought it was an interesting typology for squares in Europe. And finally, the one that won the award was a canal in Utrecht, which after popular demand and after 15 years of working, they actually managed to bring it back to life and get rid of the asphalt big highway that was on top of it. And we thought that this was like the really most important initiative and public space thing for adapting to climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Maybe you can sit for, if you agree, like to answer some questions. We can open a Q&A session. Let's have a seat. It will be better. Thank you very much for sharing this insight of this unique position you have, this travel, and all of this inspiration in different cities. So maybe if there are some questions. OK, au troisième rang. Alors en français, en anglais. Alors il y en avait une première, et puis après on prendra la deuxième ici.
OK. Thank you very much. Yes, very, very interesting. So congratulations for that. And I have a question about the impact. So I can see that the impact is great. And I just like to know at the size of the district, at the size of the town, can we see an effect as well, or it is very limited to the location where the actions are done?
Which one are you talking about?
Maybe the last one that you presented, or this kind of example. They are very, very good.
Localized, very localized.
Yes, but any impact on the town?
I think that I can't say the Catherine Canal is in Utrecht, or actually daylighting a river has enormous benefits that really influence the whole city in many, many ways, because it deals with flooding, it creates biodiversity, all of the co-benefits, the ecosystemic co-benefits that you get from putting together water with plants are really, really big. And I think it's the largest effect that you can have. Other solutions tend to be more localized, and it's an issue with adaptation. You're right. Often we have localized solutions that have not a really big scale effect, and we have to figure out how to really go crazy. Like in Medellin, they did 36. They crisscrossed the whole city with green corridors, and that has made an enormous difference. But you have to do that kind of a scale up to have a full impact.
Troisième rang.
Thank you very much, Eleni, for the presentation and for walking us through all those examples. You raised this very important notion of cross-territorial governance, which is a big issue, I think, in Paris in terms of climate change adaptation. I was wondering, through all the travels and research you've done, which are the cities or the location where this cross-territorial governance works the best? Because you talked about a lot of design examples, but I was wondering in terms of the governance, what's working well? Thank you.
That's a good question. I think that, and I could be wrong, but you can tell me what you think, that Paris tried to create a metropolitan government, but it did it it created it, and it kind of didn't really have the right muscle that it needed to have politically, or finally kind of do, and I could be totally wrong, but that's my impression. Greater Manchester went the other way. So it kind of, the different municipalities got together and decided on beginning with specific projects to collaborate, and then eventually they, from the bottom up, because they realized that they needed more and more to collaborate on different things, they actually created the Greater Manchester governance structure, which is quite successful, especially with issues that have to do with climate adaptation. So Greater Manchester is a great example. We have a similar, so I'm thinking more of metropolitan areas because that's really significant. And often it has to do with catchment areas too, because often metropolitan cities end up being where rivers are. So Sydney is another, I don't know if there's a river there. But anyway, there's another very good example of different metropolitan, different cities coming together and working together to create capacity for dealing with climate change. So these are different examples that just jump into my mind. Metropolitan governance is really, really, I think, significant. And often, the best thing would be to talk about all levels, right? From the central government to the regional, to the metropolitan, to the local, to have like some kind of specific plans, but that happens very unusually. And Singapore is a good example, but it's also a bad example because we can get authoritarian type of governments that can be both the central government and the city government, and then we're all happy because we can move. Sometimes we can move fast, but we can't depend on them because they can screw things up real bad sometimes.
Ok, merci beaucoup. Je suis Aman, architecte. Je voulais vous féliciter pour votre présentation. J'ai compris que vous avez parlé d'adaptation, ça nous concerne tous. Que fait l'ONU Habitat par rapport aux pays d'Afrique? Est-ce qu'il s'implique davantage? Vous avez parlé aussi des matières premières et vous avez parlé de l'habitat vernaculaire. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous parler plus, s'il vous plaît? Merci.
UN Habitat hasn't been focusing a lot on adaptation. It has a very small climate group, that climate department in the UN Habitat whole kind of different organization, but it has been working with integrating climate issues within the different sectors that it's been working on. So it's been trying to work with different transportation issues in different cities. It's been trying to deal with creating more equitable solutions and equitable design in cities, helping with creating better public spaces in cities. So these are the types of things, accessibility, these are the type of things that it's been working on both in a lot of cities, both in Africa and in Asia and in Latin America. My effort is to kind of make sure that the way that they work take into consideration issues of adaptation much more centrally and much more seriously. So my answer is vague, but I don't know how else to answer your question.
Thank you very much. In French. Vous avez parlé de l'importance.
I think I kind of understand.
Vous avez parlé de l'importance de verdir le monde et les villes en particulier. Je mettrais un petit bémol là. Oui, il faut verdir les villes, mais le problème, c'est que lorsque vous atteignez une certaine température, les stomates des feuilles, par exemple, se ferment, et ce qui fait qu'il n'y a plus de transpiration. Et au lieu d'être un climatiseur, l'arbre devient en réalité un radiateur. Et c'est en plus au pire moment que ça se passe, puisque c'est au moment des dômes de chaleur. De plus, il faut sûrement verdir les villes, mais à condition de laisser, pas de laisser, mais de faire en sorte que ce verdissement soit avec des vers de terre. Hubert Reeves considérait que la disparition des vers de terre équivalait à peu près à la fonte fondent de la banquise. Et lorsque l'on voit la végétalisation des villes en général et de la plantation des arbres, où l'on met au pied des arbres, par exemple, des copeaux de bois, vous ne trouvez pas de vers de terre. Alors c'est peut-être très bien pour ça évite éventuellement l'arrosage et puis éventuellement d'enlever les adventices, bien que j'aime beaucoup les adventices. Voilà, donc il faut absolument verdir les villes, je suis entièrement d'accord, mais c'est pas la solution totale, en particulier lorsqu'il y a des dômes de chaleur. Et puis surtout si c'est fait sans nos amis les vers de terre.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I don't know if it actually they become heaters. This I have not heard about, but I do know that they shut down their evapotranspiration and that they actually kind of close down all their systems so that they can survive the heat. I think it has a lot to do with how much water you have. If you can continue irrigating them to a good extent, I think it's the best. But you're absolutely right. We need to figure out what species are the best kind of species for hotter temperatures. I don't think we have enough information about. I don't know if you are an ecologist or a forester, but I don't know. I don't think we have enough information yet about the species and how they respond and which are the best species for different cities around the world. Soil is extremely important, absolutely right. And we had a discussion with Elizabeth about technosoil and how do you create soil in cities if you do get rid of asphalt and you do get rid of concrete? Like what kind of soil do you use? And then we have to see what kind of species work best for this kind of soil, and how can we talk about the kind of support that the trees need underground to make sure that they are stronger and more resilient to deal with more extreme weather events. I mean, all of these things are things that I find are very pressing and very urgent for us to figure out. I also know that trees are much more stressed. The trees that we are now planting, even in Greece, when I was the deputy mayor for urban nature, etc., we used to have, with the new plants that we planted, we used to have 12% losses because we didn't do it in any nice way. If you see how people plant trees in the pavements in Athens, it's terrible. But we used to have a 12% losses, and when I was the deputy mayor, we reached up to 40% losses because of the extreme heat, because we didn't have watering systems, because we sent the watering system to the fires, etc., etc. So we had a real big problem with, and we know that there's so much stress on the trees, and the trees that we already have we should really cherish, because the newer trees that we're putting in are having real trouble to establish themselves as well as the older ones.
Thank you very much.
Big issues.
Thank you very much. Merci à tous. Nous arrivons au terme de cette session. Thank you very much for being here today. I think that you will have other opportunities to exchange with the audience today and tomorrow. So thanks again for sharing this travel in different cities with different stakes, and we will keep traveling our 3-day journey about adaptation. So thank you very much, and we will go forward. Thanks.